Welcome to the Workology podcast, where we discuss the science and art of the workplace, gain powerful insights, resources, and perspectives on the industries of human resources and recruiting. Join your host, Jessica Miller-Merrill, chief blogger of bloggingforjobs.com, for a 45-minute in-depth and no-holds-barred look into the future of our most powerful business asset, the employee. And now, here's your host, Jessica, with this episode of Workology.
It's getting hard to hire good talent for our company. This week, I'm hosting a webinar on Blogging for Jobs about new hiring best practices focused on retention. But today's topic is all about obstacles we, as human capital leaders, encounter. At present, the average time to fill for large organizations over 5,000 employees is 58.1 days. Let me just have that sink in. 58.1 days. That is an extremely long time, and I'm of the mind that it's only going to get longer unless we openly discuss obstacles and challenges we are facing as recruiters and talent acquisition leaders in hiring. Welcome to the Workology podcast. It's great to have you on our podcast as part of the Blogging for Jobs family. My guest today is Will Thomson. He's a recruiter and thought leader who is in the trenches working to overcome these obstacles and challenges in recruiting. I can't wait to have you hear from Will today, where we're going to talk about real topics, and we're going to get real here about hiring competition and obstacles in recruiting. So welcome, Will, to the Workology podcast.
Hi, Jessica, and thanks for having me. Yeah, so my name is Will Thomson. I'm a sales recruiter. I recruit nationally and also globally. And I've been doing this for about 20 years. And you can find me at Will Recruits. I speak, I blog, I do all those fun things. So, but yeah, I'm honored to be here and looking forward to talking about recruiting, my favorite topic.
Awesome. Well, we will link to Will's Twitter and his LinkedIn and his blog when we post this podcast. And if you just go to bloggingforjobs.com and in the right-hand search bar put Will Thomson podcast, you'll be able to find all about Will. Will also writes regularly for Blogging for Jobs, and you seem to be everywhere these days. But if you just Google Will, you would be able to connect with him in lots of different places and hear his thoughts about all things recruiting. I wanted to ask you, while we get started in talking about hiring challenges and obstacles, what's the biggest challenge that you're facing right now in recruiting and hiring at present?
You know, the tables have shifted, and I think a lot's been written about this, but for many, many years, you know, the employer has had the upper hand, and now it's really the candidate. So, you know, that's been my biggest obstacle is, you know, they're being escorted, the candidates are being escorted by just about everybody. They're hiring frenzies for most every company. So a lot of competition out there right now.
Well, I just got off doing a webinar with Success Factors, and we were talking about that very thing. There's a statistic with the recent jobs report for 2014 that came out that says that we are at new job creation levels that we haven't seen since 1999. So there is a lot of competition. People are hiring at larger numbers than they have in really almost 10 years.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And, you know, I think people are beginning to be more confident. You know, in 2008, we took a really big hit with the recession, you know, and companies are adding jobs, and, you know, people are looking and exploring options at this point in time, which can be fun for a recruiter. And it also can be a headache because our plates as recruiters will be really full this year, and we're going to have a lot of competition. So I think there's going to be less really good recruiters out there, and I think there's going to be a influx of recruiters that are just learning the business that will happen this next year, because there are more jobs than there are recruiters that are really good.
For the good recruiters out there, those that know what they're doing and are experienced and are really, they're taking care of business, that's called job security.
That's correct, and that's a good thing to have.
Yeah, I'm a glass half full kind of girl, so that's what I think. Like, there's a lot of jobs out there, and it does make for lazy recruiting sometimes because there's so many jobs. People think that anyone can be a recruiter, but it does allow for the really great recruiters, those that know their stuff, to really stand out from the pack.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
I mentioned at the beginning of the show that 58.1 days is the number of days from posting to offer. and known as time to fill. This article comes from ERE, and I'll link to it in this podcast over on the blog. And as I mentioned, you can just go there and get all the research. I'll have the resources included in the transcript. I want to ask you, Will, does that 58.1 days number surprise you? And have you seen an increase in talk from other recruiters regarding their time to fill in the last few months?
I've seen it firsthand. So no, it has not surprised me. And I read that article on ERE too and thought it was a terrific article. But, there are a number of factors that cause that. I think a lot of it is there are more choices for the candidates. You have to make decisions quickly. I don't know if a lot of managers realize that. Companies are looking for niche skill sets, much more niche than they've ever been before. I think there's an inability for companies to make and to come to a consensus, which makes it very difficult. And, I think for the number of positions, there's a lack of recruiting resources to get these positions filled in a timely fashion. So realistically, a lot of these roles aren't getting filled because simply do not have enough qualified recruiting talent to find these people.
Well, it's interesting, too, because I think as a recruiter, you have to be this master people manager, right? Where you have to manage your employees or your candidates, there's expectations, and you're selling them a little bit. I mean, you want them to come into work for your organization, but then you also have to manage those hiring managers who maybe want to wait for somebody else or want to lowball a candidate with an offer. How do you do that?
For managing expectations for a manager, one thing you always have to talk about is process. It frustrates everyone when you don't have a process in place. Over communicate with people, set clear expectations up front, and I think you can help manage the process a little bit better. But that's my advice.
We have a recruiter intake call form that I'm working on right now over on Blogging for Jobs. I don't think it'll be available by the time this podcast goes live, but if you go to the site and comment on this podcast, I will shoot it over an email form to you. It's just a PDF, but I find it extremely helpful. I've used one similar to this myself in trying to remember and have a process for setting expectations for everyone involved and then being able to get those nuggets of information from the hiring manager on what they really want from their hires.
Yeah, those intake sessions are so crucial. You lay everything out on a silver platter and nothing is left unsaid. But when you really don't define those terms up front, that's when there's a lot of problems in the process.
And that's probably why the time to fill is 58.1 days.
That has a lot to do with it.
One of my biggest frustrations working in HR and recruiting was the hiring managers, from the changing job requirements, crazy expectations to their lack of time to interview candidates. I know we talked a little bit about hiring managers, but is there like a secret sauce or something that you use to make it more smoothly beyond the intake call and form?
So I use humor. I like to make them laugh. I like them to get to know me. I believe that relationships are key, and that it's hard to be mean or to not follow the process when you do use humor or get to know them on a personal basis and are trying to drive process. If you make it sound like you're on the same team and you're looking to obtain the same objectives, then I think it works a lot better than just trying to fill a requisition for them, and getting to understand their business, getting to understand what their plans are. But recently I've had a scenario where, just taking the extra time to say, so tell me about what you did in 2014, what you didn't do, and how, what do you see about 2015 that's going to be different? And it really sets them back and thinks, oh, this guy's a partner. He's just not an order taker.
What I like that about you is because I think that you're just a really likable person and you play to your strengths, right? Like when I think about the first time we met, which I think in person was in Miami for the Top Recruiter Gala, actually, yeah. You're just like, you're just fun to be around, and you're just a great, warm person with a good smile. And that really plays to the strength of you, right? If you're developing a relationship with that hiring manager, they can't say no to Will. I mean, not with that smile. So
Thank
that's a good thing. Yeah.
you. Yeah, you've got to smile and you got to laugh, and life's too short to take it too seriously, right? So if you can make them relaxed, that's the key.
Plus, you're a good old Southern boy, so
I am.
you are, and I love that about you as well. So I wanted to ask you too: what are other hiring obstacles that you believe recruiters are encountering that haven't been talked about enough?
So when you think about recruiting, all that ever gets discussed is sourcing, right? And that's really hard to ignore, because without looking for the candidates, you're not going to go anywhere. But recruiting is so much more than just sourcing. There are all sorts of things involved. It is a sales job. You are out there selling to the manager at the beginning. You're selling to the candidate. You're dealing with counter offers. You're dealing with a number of processes that, contracts, approvals, invoices. These are things that we don't talk about on a day-to-day basis, but as a recruiter, they're realities that you have to deal with every day.
Well, let's take a little bit of a reset. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill, and you're listening to the Workology podcast powered by Blogging for Jobs. Today's topic is hiring challenges and obstacles with my guest, Will Thomson. You can connect with Will on Twitter at Will Recruits. Now, we've talked a lot about obstacles. I want to focus on solutions because remember, I'm the glass half full kind of girl here. What are some solutions you see for recruiters or leaders who are having trouble finding qualified candidates?
People don't think about the power of the referral a lot of the time. It is still the number one way to find candidates. To really partnering with your hiring manager is probably the best way to do that. And I also think, just you think about branding and how important that's going to be in 2015. You really have to focus on your personal brand, your company brand, and that's really going to help drive candidates as well. I would like to say, more and more companies are going to move away from the standard post and pray, and more people are going to be attracted to your company by the brand that you have.
Well, really what you're talking about is, referrals in my mind are about relationships, and employment branding is all about relationships. So maybe 2015 is kind of the year of the relationship, because the old way of doing things where we're posting and praying, I like to call it spray and pray, but we're putting it out there. It's not giving us the results that we're looking for. And you're in sales too, right? And you're recruiting sales professionals. So it sounds like it's all about relationships to me.
So Jessica, you're absolutely right. Relationships are key. And I think that's going to be what separates good recruiters and bad recruiters this next year. And things are going to move towards like they were in the 90s and early 2000s, where, you really have to develop those deep relationships. No longer are you going to be able to just put your earphones in and source away and send in mails and be successful, because the ones that actually reach out via phone or who actually connect with them in a personal way that interests them, I think are going to be the people that win. And it may not be over the phone. It could be a text, or it could be talking a little bit more in depth by looking at their profile and finding out that they're a runner. But, you need to do some research and make it sound more personal so you can build these deep relationships so you can move forward, because most people aren't doing that.
And research sounds like it's not just for sourcers, right? Like every recruiter in the process needs to find that commonality with the candidate in order to develop that relationship or bond.
That's correct. You have to continually build those relationships, and it's not just the sourcers. It's the entire process. You're going to have to partner with the HR business partners. You're going to have to partner with payroll and onboarding, and just ensure a good onboarding process. So throughout the process, it's very important that from the very beginning to the very end that you have those relationships internally and externally.
Cool. So let's talk about your go-to recruiting move, because you know how people have that like go-to dance move? I do, and it's horrible, but I have one. I want to talk about your go-to good recruiting move. Let's just say that you have a new job posting that's landed on your desk, a new requisition. What's the first thing that you do?
Yeah, the first thing that I do if I get a requisition that comes on my desk would be to Uh, First of all, I think that it's so important to be quick in this business, to respond immediately to the hiring manager, set up a time to talk to the hiring manager, and then really take a deep, deep intake session and talk to them about, the things we talked about. Where do you see this company? Where do you see the department going? Tell me about the environment they're working in. Where have people traditionally worked well in this position before? So there's all sorts of questions you can ask regarding the position, the environment, their goals, things like that. So you can clearly articulate that, and then just setting expectations throughout the process and letting them know, this is what they need to do and this is how we're going to be successful.
Where does LinkedIn fit into that process? Because for LinkedIn, it's the number one place for recruiters to go. I'm kind of the mind that if everybody's going there, I don't want to go there, mostly because it's diluted and, lots of emails are getting sent and not open. So where does LinkedIn play in this sort of process for you?
So I use LinkedIn for every recruiting position, and I wish I didn't have to, but it has become the best place to find candidates. And until another tool comes out, which I wish there would be another tool, because they're kind of like the grill that everybody wants to get off their back. But until there's another tool that it just blows me away, it's still the number one tool. I think that in finding candidates on LinkedIn is where you start, and then you kind of customize it from there. You can find out if they have a blog or a Twitter handle, or do something different than another recruiter is going to do. And if you're going to send an email, make it sound vague enough to grab their attention, but interesting enough that they'll want to call you back. So, I don't give a whole lot of descriptions and what I'm trying to sell. I just give them enough to think this is something they can't live without. So, I do use Twitter. I use blogs. I use Facebook quite a bit. So I use all the social media tools. I use Google daily, meetup groups, whatever. But LinkedIn is still a primary focus, and that's where most people start, unfortunately. And I'm ready for that tool to come out. I'm ready for a big data tool to come out, and I think everybody is. But it's just we're not there yet.
There's some people working on some good stuff. I will just mention that we have some nice resources on templates for LinkedIn InMails, and I'll put the link in the bottom of the podcast over in the resources section. So if you're looking for a way to maybe increase those open rates, LinkedIn has made some changes in the last 8 or 9 months. We did a webinar last year on some of those changes. So we have some good best practices that you can employ. I mean, they're continuing to make changes. It'll be interesting to see what happens with LinkedIn as we go forward, especially with Facebook at Work, which just also launched in beta earlier this week too.
Yeah, I think we're all ready for something different. I mean, there's nobody out there that has said, "Oh, LinkedIn, it's a great tool." I think if you asked Stacy Zapar if it was the best tool, I think she'd tell you no.
Wow. I didn't plan on this being a LinkedIn bashing session, because I don't think that it is. I think that, it's kind of like job boards, right? Like they do the job. LinkedIn does the job. It just could be so much more. But what it could be, or what we need, it hasn't been developed yet.
I believe that.
Last week, I wrote about some simple new hire strategies, and I'm of the belief that recruiters are the ambassadors for the organization and should continue to touch or reach out to employees that they've hired at different points, maybe like 30, 60, 90, and 120 days. What are your thoughts on this? Is there a reasonable expectation for recruiters to do this?
So I've talked to a lot of recruiters, and I've talked to agency recruiters, and I've talked to corporate recruiters. And I think regardless of if you are an agency or a corporate recruiter, I think it's essential. Because I think you need to understand the landscape of why people are coming and leaving and staying in satisfaction. And I think a lot of the referrals come from people in the first 30 or 60 days of their employment. So, if they have a good experience, they're more likely to refer people. When I joined organizations, I want to have a good experience, and I want to make sure as a recruiter they have a good experience as well. So I mark it on my calendar. to follow up every 30, 60, and 90 days just to find out, how their experience has been, and make sure that, if there's anything I can do to help them with their hiring or with their onboarding. I do believe, even if you're an agency recruiter and you think you've sold the deal, you've got paid, well, I mean, it's essential, because that's where you're going to place that person the next time they go to another organization. So I think it's key. I think it's key on both levels.
You have a great blog. It's called bullseyerecruiting.net. So Bullseye Recruiting, and you write a lot of different topics. There's one on your blog that just published on purpose. But I also noticed that you write about recruiting topics, but you also write about job search topics. There's one on here called Resume Etiquette, the do's and don'ts. Why do you write about both? Is there a strategy behind that?
Well, I've been the candidate, and I understand that a lot of people need some help or advice. And I get frustrated when I'm a recruiter and I see people make common mistakes. And they check my profile on LinkedIn, and then they'll go to my website, and I want to make sure that there's some good, solid advice of what can help them. So the etiquette really just shows them what they should. It's a database for them to find information about it. But I am passionate about recruiting. I'm passionate about social media, and then in life in general, you'll see a few things about life that don't have a whole lot to do with any of the above topics. But that's what's fun about blogging, is you have the ability to kind of bring all facets together.
Can you tell us about maybe your most recent hiring success, maybe that's came from a alternative platform like blogging or social media? Something that is interesting and kind of surprising?
This is not done yet, but I have recently worked with, I'm trying to find someone in Seattle that is very, very difficult to find. And, I found them in a meetup group, and it did not have their full name, just their first name and the initial of their last name, and went to LinkedIn to find out who they were, and then wouldn't respond. So on their LinkedIn profile, they had their Twitter account and connected with them on Twitter, and we're at the final stages. So, it's about being a researcher, I think. And it doesn't just always come from LinkedIn.
Interesting. I love Twitter for a lot of reasons. I just tweeted Sammy Hagar, I'm looking for a tequila sponsor for our South by Southwest party. And I thought, well, maybe Sammy is the guy to sponsor our party. We'll see. I don't know, but it's fun anyway.
I can probably find you someone.
All right. Well, let's talk offline. I want to get people connected to you. Where can people go? Where's the best place for them to learn more about Will Thomson?
So a couple of places. Please take a chance and go to my website, bullseyerecruiting.net, and then also connect with me on Twitter. I'm much more active there, and you'll find more about me at Will Recruits. And then I'm on LinkedIn, and my last name is spelled Thomson without a P. But I would love to have a chance to get to know you and build a relationship with you. So if you're passionate about recruiting or the candidate experience, or sales in general, I'd love to talk to you.
Well, thank you, Will, for joining the Workology podcast. And thanks to you, listeners, for tuning in. This is the Workology podcast. It's hosted by me, Jessica Miller Merrill, where we discuss the science and art of the workplace, HR, and recruitment. Until next time, you can visit Blogging for Jobs to listen to all our past episodes. Just go to bloggingforjobs.com/category/podcast, and you'll be connected to all our episodes. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.
Production services for the Workology podcast with Jessica Miller Merrill provided by Total Picture Media.